The bullet that killed Catherine Kane's husband never touched her flesh, but it destroyed her heart all the same. She stood in the dusty street of Watsonville, California, on that scorching June afternoon in 1873, watching the undertaker's wagon carry away the last remnants of the life she had tried so desperately to build. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of believing that love could conquer the demons that haunted William Kane, and it had ended with him dead in a saloon brawl over cards and whiskey. The other wives in town whispered their condolences, but Catherine saw the truth in their eyes. They had warned her about William, about his drinking and his gambling, and she had been fool enough to marry him anyway, believing her love could change him. Now, at 24 years old, Catherine found herself a widow with nothing but a small dress shop on the edge of town, and a heart that felt like it had turned to stone. She had loved once, loved deeply and completely, and it had brought her nothing but pain and humiliation. As she turned away from the street and walked back toward her shop, she made herself a promise. Never again. Love was a luxury she could no longer afford, a gamble with odds far worse than any card game. From this moment forward, she would live for herself alone. The months that followed were a blur of needle and thread, of measuring and hemming, of polite conversations with customers who all seemed to have opinions about what a young widow should do with her life. Some suggested she return to her family in San Francisco, but Catherine had burned those bridges when she ran away with William against their wishes. Others hinted that a woman alone needed a man to take care of her, that she should consider remarrying as soon as propriety allowed. Catherine smiled and nodded and ignored every suggestion, pouring all her energy into making her shop successful enough to ensure she would never need to depend on anyone again. Winter came to Watsonville with surprising force that year, bringing rain that turned the streets to rivers of mud and kept most folks indoors. Business slowed, and Catherine found herself sitting alone in her shop for hours, the silence broken only by the sound of rain against the windows. It was during one of these quiet afternoons that the door burst open, bringing with it a gust of cold wind and the largest man Catherine had ever seen. He had to duck to fit through the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly spanning its width. Rain dripped from his dark hair, which hung past his shoulders in wet tangles, and his beard was thick and untamed. He wore buckskin that looked like it had seen years of hard use, and his boots were caked with mud. But it was his eyes that caught Catherine's attention, sharp and green like the forest itself, scanning the small shop with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. "We are closed," Catherine said, though she knew the sign on the door said otherwise. Something about this man unsettled her, made her aware of how alone she was in the shop, how far she was from the nearest neighbor. "Sign says you are open until 5, the man said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "It is barely past 3. Catherine straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated in her own establishment. "I am not sure what you need, sir, but I run a dress shop. I do not believe I can help you." The man moved further into the shop, and Catherine could not help but notice the sheer size of him. His arms were thick with muscle, visible even beneath the buckskin, and his hands looked like they could break wood with ease. He moved with surprising grace for someone so large, like a mountain lion stalking through the wilderness. "I need a dress," he said simply, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "For a little girl about 8 years old. I have her measurements here." Catherine blinked, completely thrown by this revelation. Of all the things she had expected from this wild-looking man, a request for a child's dress was not among them. She took the paper he offered, careful not to let their fingers touch, and studied the measurements written in a surprisingly neat hand. "Your daughter?" she asked, her professional instincts overriding her wariness. "My sister," he corrected. "My parents died 2 years back. Fever took them both within a week of each other. Sarah has been living with me up in the mountains ever since. She needs something decent to wear when we come to town. The dresses I have been buying are wearing through." Catherine looked at the measurements again, then at the giant of a man standing in her shop, trying to reconcile the image of him caring for a young girl. "You live in the mountains?" "Up near Big Basin," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the northeast. "I trap and hunt, sell the pelts. It is a good life, quiet and away from trouble, but Sarah deserves better than the rough clothes I can provide. She deserves something pretty, something a girl would be proud to wear." There was something in his voice when he spoke about his sister, a tenderness that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. Catherine found herself softening despite her better judgment. "I can make something for her. It will take about 2 weeks, perhaps 3 depending on the fabric you choose." "Money is not an issue," he said, pulling out a leather pouch heavy with coins. "I want the best you can make, something that will last, and if you could make 2, I would be grateful. Sarah grows faster than I can keep up with." Catherine spent the next hour showing him fabrics and discussing designs, and she found herself surprised by how opinionated he was about what his sister should have. He wanted sturdy material, nothing too delicate, but he also insisted on lace trim and buttons shaped like flowers. The contrast between his rough exterior and his obvious love for his sister created a curiosity in Catherine that she tried hard to suppress. "I will need a name for the order," she said finally, pulling out her ledger. "Kade," he said. "Kade Garrett. And you are Mrs. Kane, I presume?" "I am," Catherine said, not offering her first name. "You can collect the dresses in 3 weeks. I will send word to the trading post when they are ready." Kade Garrett nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Thank you, Mrs. Kane. My sister will be very happy." She has not had much to be happy about these past 2 years. After he left, Catherine sat for a long time, staring at the measurements and the pile of fabric they had selected. She told herself the strange flutter in her chest was just surprise, just the shock of such an unusual customer. It certainly was not interest, because Catherine Kane was done with men and all the heartache they brought. But as she began cutting the fabric that evening, her mind kept drifting back to those green eyes and the gentle way he had spoken about his sister. The 3 weeks passed quickly, filled with careful stitching and intricate detail work. Catherine found herself putting more effort into these dresses than she had into any commission in months. She told herself it was professional pride, but deep down she knew it was something else. She wanted to see Kade Garrett's face when he saw what she had created for his sister. When he finally returned, he was cleaner than before, his hair pulled back and his beard trimmed, though still substantial. He looked almost civilized, though there was no mistaking the raw power in his frame or the wildness in his eyes that spoke of someone more comfortable in the forest than in town. Catherine brought out the dresses, watching his face carefully as she displayed them. She had chosen a deep blue fabric for one, with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and a soft green for the other, with tiny embroidered flowers along the hem. Both were sturdy enough for everyday wear but pretty enough for any occasion. "They are perfect," Kade said quietly, running one large hand carefully over the fabric. "Sarah will love them. You have a rare talent, Mrs. Kane." "I am glad you are satisfied," Catherine said, calculating the final cost in her head. She quoted him a fair price, perhaps even slightly less than she should have charged for the hours of work involved. Kade paid without hesitation, adding several extra coins to the pile. "For the exceptional work," he said when she tried to protest, and I was wondering if I might ask you something." Catherine waited, suddenly wary again. "Would you consider making clothes for Sarah on a regular basis? I know it is not conventional, but I would pay well, and it would ease my mind to know she has someone looking out for such things. I am adequate at keeping her fed and safe, but matters of dresses and proper clothing for a growing girl are beyond my understanding." It was a reasonable request, purely business, and yet Catherine felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "I suppose that would be acceptable," she heard herself saying. "You could bring her by for measurements when you are next in town." "Actually," Kade said, looking almost uncomfortable for the first time, "I was hoping you might come to us. Sarah is not comfortable in town. Too many people after living isolated for so long. And I thought perhaps you could advise on other things a girl needs that I might not think of." Every instinct Catherine had developed over the past month screamed at her to refuse. Going to an isolated cabin in the mountains with a man she barely knew was beyond foolish. It was dangerous. And yet, she found herself thinking about the little girl growing up without a mother, without any female guidance at all, and her resolve wavered. "I would pay for your time, of course," Kade continued. "And I would come get you and bring you back safely. It is about a half-day's ride from town. You could spend the afternoon with Sarah, perhaps stay for dinner, and I would have you back before dark." "I will think about it," Catherine said, which was more than she had intended to offer. "Come back next week and I will give you my answer." Kade nodded, seeming to understand that pushing further would be counterproductive. He gathered the dresses carefully, wrapping them in the paper Catherine provided, and headed for the door. But he paused again before leaving, looking back at her with those intense green eyes. "I know you do not know me, Mrs. Kane, and you have no reason to trust me. But I give you my word as a man who loved his parents and who loves his sister more than his own life, I would never do anything to harm you or make you uncomfortable. Sarah needs someone like you, someone kind and skilled and patient. Please consider it." After he left, Catherine stood in the empty shop, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with something she had sworn to never feel again. She was not attracted to Kade Garrett, she told herself firmly. She was simply touched by his devotion to his sister, by the obvious love in his voice when he spoke of her. That was all. But that night, alone in her small rooms above the shop, Catherine dreamed of green eyes and gentle hands carefully folding tiny dresses, and she woke with tears on her cheeks for the first time since William's death. The week that followed was one of the longest of Catherine's life. She went through the motions of running her shop, helping customers and working on commissions, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about Kade's request, about the little girl living in the mountains without any female companionship or guidance. She thought about how isolated that life must be, how different from the childhood Catherine herself had experienced in San Francisco. She also thought about Kade himself, though she tried not to. She remembered the way his large hands had touched the dresses so carefully, as if afraid his strength might damage them. She remembered the tenderness in his voice when he spoke about his sister, and she remembered the straightforward honesty in his eyes when he promised her safety. Catherine had spent the past months building a life that required nothing from anyone, depending only on herself. The idea of venturing outside that carefully constructed safety felt terrifying. But it also felt like something else, something she could not quite name. It felt like possibility. When Kade returned exactly 1 week later, Catherine had made her decision. "I will come," she said before he could even ask. "But only for an afternoon visit this first time. If Sarah is comfortable with me, and if I feel the arrangement is appropriate, we can discuss making it a regular occurrence." The smile that broke across Cade's face transformed him entirely. For a moment, the rough mountain man disappeared and Catherine saw someone younger, someone almost boyish in his delight. "Thank you," he said. "Sarah will be so happy. When can you come?" "This Sunday," Catherine said. "The shop is closed and I have no other commitments." "I will be here at 8 in the morning," Cade promised. "Dress warm, it is colder in the mountains than here." That Sunday dawned clear and bright, the winter rain having finally cleared. Catherine dressed in her warmest traveling clothes, practical and sturdy, and tried to ignore the nervous flutter in her stomach. She was being ridiculous, she told herself. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. She was going to help a young girl who needed guidance, and she would be paid for her time. It was no different than any other commission, except it felt entirely different and Catherine knew it. Cade arrived promptly at 8, riding a massive chestnut horse and leading a smaller dappled mare. He dismounted with easy grace and nodded to Catherine. "This is Willow," he said, indicating the mare. "She is gentle and sure-footed. Do you ride?" "It has been a while," Catherine admitted, "but yes, I know how." Cade helped her mount, his hand steady on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle as if she weighed nothing at all. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through Catherine, and she was grateful when he stepped away and mounted his own horse. They rode out of Watsonville heading northeast, and as the town fell away behind them, Catherine felt something inside her begin to relax. The morning was beautiful, crisp and clear, and the landscape around them was breathtaking. Rolling hills gave way to steeper terrain, and soon they were climbing into the mountains proper, following trails that seemed invisible to Catherine but which Cade navigated with confident ease. "Tell me about Sarah," Catherine said as they rode. "What is she like?" Cade's expression softened immediately. "She is brave," he said. "When our parents died, she could have fallen apart. She was only 6 years old, and suddenly her whole world was gone, but she adapted to mountain life better than I could have hoped. She helps with chores, she has learned to fish, and she loves exploring the forest. But she is still just a little girl, and I worry that I am not giving her everything she needs. I can teach her to survive, but I cannot teach her to be a lady, to have the skills and graces she will need when she is older." "You are doing better than you think," Catherine said gently. "The fact that you are thinking about these things, that you want the best for her, means you are already giving her what she needs most: love and security." "I hope so," Cade said, "but I am glad you agreed to come. Even if it is just this once, I think it will mean the world to her." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Catherine found herself studying Cade when she thought he was not looking. He sat his horse like he was born to it, his body moving with the animal's rhythm in perfect harmony. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his arms thick with muscle that spoke of years of hard physical labor. His hair, tied back today, gleamed dark in the sunlight, and his profile was strong and rugged, like the mountains around them. Catherine caught herself staring and quickly looked away, heat rising to her cheeks. What was wrong with her? She was not some foolish girl to be turned by a handsome face and a strong body. She had loved and lost, and she had learned her lesson. Attraction was meaningless, a temporary madness that faded and left only pain in its wake. "We are almost there," Cade said, pointing ahead to where the trees thickened. "The cabin is just through those pines." The cabin, when they reached it, was not what Catherine had expected. It was larger than she had imagined, well built and solid, with glass windows and a stone chimney. The clearing around it was tidy, with a small garden plot waiting for spring planting and neat stacks of firewood. A creek burbled somewhere nearby, and the forest pressed close on all sides, creating a sense of isolation that was both peaceful and slightly unnerving. As they dismounted, the cabin door flew open and a small figure came running out. Sarah Garrett was thin and wiry, all arms and legs, with her brother's dark hair hanging in 2 long braids down her back. She wore one of the dresses Catherine had made, the blue one, and her face lit up with excitement as she ran to Kade. "You are back," she cried, throwing her arms around his waist. "I was watching for you all morning." "I told you I would be back before noon," Kade said, hugging her back with obvious affection. "Sarah, I want you to meet someone very special. This is Mrs. Kane. She made your beautiful new dresses, and she has agreed to visit us today." Sarah turned to Catherine, and Catherine felt her breath catch. The girl's eyes were the same striking green as her brother's, but where his held the wariness of someone who had seen hardship, her still held a child's openness and wonder. "Thank you for my dresses," Sarah said, dropping into an awkward curtsy. "I love them so much. They are the prettiest things I have ever owned." "You are very welcome," Catherine said, smiling. "And please, you do not need to curtsy for me. I am just a dressmaker." "Kade says you are an artist," Sarah said seriously. "He says you have magic in your fingers to make such beautiful things." Catherine glanced at Kade, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have said something like that," he admitted. The afternoon passed more quickly than Catherine could have imagined. Sarah was delightful company, curious and bright, asking endless questions about everything from fabric to fashion to what it was like living in town. Catherine measured her for future dresses, noting how much she had grown even in the short time since Kade had brought her first measurements. They talked about colors and styles, and Catherine found herself making suggestions not just for dresses, but for other things Sarah might need. Kade had disappeared shortly after introducing them, giving them space, but Catherine could hear him outside chopping wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe providing a steady background to their conversation. When he came back in to start preparing dinner, his shirt was damp with sweat despite the winter chill, and Catherine had to force herself to look away from the way the fabric clung to his muscled frame. Dinner was simple but good: venison stew and fresh bread that Kade had apparently learned to make out of necessity. As they ate, Catherine watched the easy affection between brother and sister, the way Kade gently corrected Sarah's table manners without making her feel bad, the way Sarah looked at him with complete trust and adoration. This was nothing like the relationship Catherine had with William, which had been all passion and turbulence. This was something deeper, more fundamental. This was family. "Would you like to see my room?" Sarah asked after dinner. "Kade made me a real bed frame and everything." Catherine followed Sarah up to the loft, which had been divided into 2 spaces with a hanging blanket for privacy. Sarah's space was small but cozy, with the handmade bed, a small dresser, and drawings pinned to the walls. Catherine recognized the amateur hand of a child, but there was something lovely about them, landscapes and animals rendered with careful attention. "Did you draw these?" Catherine asked. Sarah nodded. "Kade gives me paper when he goes to town. He says art is important, that Mama used to paint." "I never saw her paintings, though. They were lost when our house burned." "Your house burned?" Catherine asked gently. "After Mama and Papa died," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "We were not there when it happened. We were staying with neighbors. Kade says it was probably someone's cooking fire that spread. Everything was lost. That is why we moved up here, to Kade's trapping cabin. He had been living here for a few years before, but he made it bigger for me." Catherine felt her heart twist. These two had lost everything, and yet they had built this life together through sheer determination and love. Kade could have sent Sarah to an orphanage or to relatives. Instead, He had completely altered his life to care for her, to give her a home. When Catherine came back down from the loft, Kade was cleaning up from dinner, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. "Sarah showed me her drawings," Catherine said. "She has talent." "She gets that from our mother," Kade said. "I am useless at anything artistic. I can barely write a legible sentence." "Yet you wrote those measurements very neatly," Catherine pointed out. "I practiced that for an hour before coming to your shop," Kade admitted with a slight smile. "I wanted to make sure you could read them." There was something so endearing about that admission that Catherine felt her carefully maintained distance begin to crumble a little more. She helped him finish the dishes, working in comfortable silence, and then realized with a start how late it had gotten. "I should head back," she said reluctantly. "It will be dark soon." "I will get the horses ready," Kade said. "Sarah, come say goodbye." The ride back to town was quieter than the ride up had been, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, and Catherine found herself wishing the journey could last longer, which was absurd, of course. She barely knew this man, and what she did know should probably concern her more than it attracted her. When they reached the edge of Watsonville, Kade stopped his horse. "I want to thank you again for today. Sarah has not stopped smiling since you arrived. She even asked if you might be her friend." "I would be honored to be her friend," Catherine said, and meant it. "You can bring her to the shop anytime, or I can visit again if you prefer." "Would you?" Kade asked, hope clear in his voice. "Visit again, I mean. Sarah took to you like I have never seen her take to anyone, and I will admit, it was nice having another adult to talk to. I love my sister, but sometimes I miss conversation that does not involve questions about everything under the sun." Catherine laughed. "She is very curious." "That is one way to put it," Kade said, smiling. "So you will come again?" "Yes," Catherine heard herself say, "I will come again." As she dismounted in front of her shop and watched Kade ride away, Catherine felt something she had not felt in over a year. She felt anticipation for the future, a sense that perhaps there was more to life than just surviving day to day. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The visits became a regular occurrence after that. Every Sunday, weather permitting, Kade would arrive at Catherine's shop and they would ride up to the mountain cabin together. Catherine told herself she was doing it for Sarah, who clearly needed female companionship and guidance. She taught the girl to sew, to read better than Kade could teach her, to cook more than just basic survival fare. She brought books from town and read to Sarah, opening up worlds beyond the mountains. But if Catherine was honest with herself, Sarah was not the only reason she kept going back. She found herself looking forward to seeing Kade as much as seeing his sister. She loved watching him chop wood, the powerful swing of the axe, the flex of muscle beneath his shirt. She loved the way he listened when she talked, really listened, as if her words mattered. She loved his dry sense of humor, and the way he was never afraid to admit when he did not know something. She loved how gentle he was with Sarah, despite his size and strength, how patient he was with her endless questions, and she was terrified of all of it. One Sunday in early spring, nearly 4 months after that first visit, Catherine arrived at the cabin to find Sarah in tears. Kade looked helpless, standing in the middle of the room with his hands hanging at his sides, clearly at a loss. "What happened?" Catherine asked, hurrying to the girl. "She will not tell me," Kade said, frustration evident in his voice. "She has been crying since she woke up, but she will not say what is wrong." Catherine sat down next to Sarah and pulled her close. "Can you tell me what is bothering you?" she asked gently. Sarah buried her face in Catherine's shoulder and sobbed harder. Finally, through hiccuping breaths, she managed to say, "I miss Mama. I miss her so much, and I cannot remember what she looked like anymore. Her face is all fuzzy in my head and I am forgetting her." Catherine's heart broke. She held Sarah tighter and looked up at Kade, seeing the pain in his eyes. This was a hurt he could not fix, a problem he could not solve with strength or skill. "It is all right to miss her," Catherine said softly. "It is all right to be sad. And forgetting what she looked like does not mean you are forgetting her. You carry her with you in other ways. In your love of drawing, in the way you see beauty in everything around you. Those came from her, and they will never fade." "But I want to remember her face," Sarah wailed. Kade knelt down beside them, his large hand gentle on Sarah's back. "I remember, little one. I remember everything about her, and I will tell you whenever you want. Her eyes were like ours, green as the forest. She had dark hair like you, and she wore it in a braid that hung down to her waist. She had a small scar on her chin from when she fell out of a tree as a girl, and she used to joke that it was her mark of wildness." As Kade described their mother in loving detail, Sarah's sobs gradually subsided. Catherine watched his face as he spoke, seeing the grief there, the love that had not diminished with time. This was a man who knew how to love deeply, how to commit completely. This was nothing like William, who had loved only himself and his next drink. The realization hit Catherine like a physical blow. She was falling in love with Kade Garrett, had perhaps already fallen, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. All her walls, all her carefully constructed defenses, had crumbled without her even noticing. She was in love with his strength and his gentleness, with his devotion to his sister and his quiet competence. She was in love with the way he looked at her, like she was something precious and valuable. She was in love with a mountain man, and it terrified her more than anything ever had. After Sarah had calmed down and gone outside to play, Kade turned to Catherine. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I never know what to do when she gets like that. I am not good with feelings and tears." "You did fine," Catherine said. "You told her exactly what she needed to hear." "Only after you got her to tell us what was wrong," Kade pointed out. He hesitated, then added, "You are good with her. Good for her. She is happier than she has been since our parents died. That is because of you." "I am glad I can help," Catherine said, looking anywhere but at his face, afraid he would see too much in her eyes. "Catherine," Kade said, and it was the first time he had used her first name. The sound of it in his deep voice made her shiver. "Can I ask you something?" She finally looked at him, and what she saw in his green eyes made her breath catch. There was want there and hope and fear that mirrored her own. "Why do you keep coming back?" he asked. "I know Sarah is part of it, but I do not think that is all. At least, I hope that is not all." Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. This was the moment where she could lie, could retreat behind her walls and protect herself. Or she could take a risk, could reach out for something she had sworn never to want again. "It is not all," she admitted quietly. "I keep coming back because I feel at home here in a way I have not felt at home anywhere in years. Because Sarah has become dear to me, yes, but also because you have become dear to me. And that terrifies me, Kade, because I swore I would never let myself feel this way about anyone again." Kade took a step closer, close enough that Catherine had to tilt her head back to look at him. "Your husband," he said, and it was not quite a question. "He was not a good man," Catherine said. "I loved him, or I thought I did, but he loved alcohol and gambling more than he ever loved me. I spent 3 years trying to save him from himself, and all I got for it was heartbreak and humiliation. When he died, I promised myself I was done with love. It hurt too much, cost too much. I am not him," Kade said simply. "I do not drink beyond an occasional beer, and I have never gambled on anything but my own skills. I have spent the past 4 months trying not to fall in love with you, Catherine Kane, and I have failed spectacularly. You are in my thoughts when I wake and when I sleep." I look forward to Sundays like they are holy days, not because of church but because I get to see you. And I know you were hurt, and I know you have every reason to be cautious, but I am asking you to take a chance. On me, on us." Catherine felt tears burning in her eyes. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid too," Kade admitted. "I am afraid you will decide I am not worth the risk. I'm afraid I will fail you somehow, that I will not be enough. I am just a mountain man, Catherine. I can offer you a simple life, a hard life in many ways. But I can offer you honesty and faithfulness and a love that will never waver. Is that enough?" Catherine reached up and touched his face, feeling the softness of his beard, the warmth of his skin. "It is more than enough," she said. "It is everything." Kade pulled her close, and for a long moment they just held each other, two wounded souls finding comfort and hope in each other's arms. Then he tilted her face up and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as Catherine responded. It was nothing like kissing William had been. There was no desperation here, no sense of trying to hold onto something that was slipping away. This was solid and real and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I did not plan to, but I do." "I love you too," Catherine said, and felt the last of her walls crumble completely. "I did not want to, but I do." They heard Sarah calling from outside and reluctantly stepped apart. But as they went to join her, Kade caught Catherine's hand and laced his fingers through hers, and Catherine felt something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten what it was. She felt hope. The spring bloomed into summer, and Catherine's life transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She still ran her dress shop in Watsonville, but now she spent as much time as possible at the mountain cabin. The arrangement was unconventional, scandalous even, but Catherine found she did not care what people thought. She was careful to maintain propriety, never staying overnight at the cabin, but everyone in town knew something was developing between the widow and the mountain man. Sarah was delighted by the romance blossoming between her brother and Catherine. She had loved Catherine from the start, but now she talked excitedly about Catherine becoming her sister, about them becoming a real family. Kade was more cautious, not wanting to rush Catherine, but Catherine could see the hope in his eyes every time Sarah mentioned the future. It was in late July, on a particularly hot afternoon, that everything changed. Catherine had spent the day at the cabin, teaching Sarah more advanced sewing techniques while Kade worked on repairing the fence around the garden. She was preparing to head back to town when suddenly Kade called out urgently. Catherine and Sarah rushed outside to find Kade staring down the trail, his body tense. "What is wrong?" Catherine asked. "Smoke," Kade said, pointing. "Look, coming from the direction of town." Catherine looked and felt her stomach drop. A thick plume of dark smoke was rising from where Watsonville lay, too much smoke to be a simple cooking fire. "We need to go see what is happening," Catherine said immediately. "My shop, the town, I will take you," Kade said. "Sarah, you stay here. Lock the door and do not open it for anyone but us. We will be back as soon as we can." They rode hard and fast, fear lending speed to their horses. As they got closer to town, they could see the fire was not as widespread as Catherine had feared, but it was bad enough. Several buildings on Main Street were ablaze and people were running everywhere, trying to organize a bucket brigade from the town well. Catherine's dress shop was untouched, being on the edge of town, but the general store, the saloon, and the hotel were all burning. The heat was intense, and the smoke made it hard to breathe. Kade immediately joined the men fighting the fire, his strength invaluable as he hauled bucket after bucket of water, coordinating the efforts with the natural leadership that came from someone used to surviving in harsh conditions. Catherine worked alongside the women, wetting down buildings near the fire to prevent the flames from spreading, helping to carry out belongings from threatened structures. She worked for hours, until her hands were blistered and her lungs ached from the smoke, but she did not stop. This was her town, her community, and she would fight for it. By the time they finally got the fire under control, it was well past dark. 3 buildings were completely destroyed and 2 more were badly damaged. Miraculously, no one had been killed, though several people had minor burns and injuries. The town doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Harris, was overwhelmed trying to treat everyone. "I need to help," Catherine told Kade. "These people need care, and I have some experience with basic medicine. My mother taught me." "Then help," Kade said simply. "I will stay as long as you need me." They worked through the night, Catherine cleaning and bandaging burns, Kade helping to move injured people and salvage what could be saved from the burned buildings. It was dawn before things finally calmed down enough for them to stop. Catherine looked at Kade, both of them covered in soot and ash, exhausted beyond measure. "Sarah," she said, suddenly remembering. "She must be so worried." "I will go get her," Kade said. "She will be safe, I made sure of that. But I should let her know we are all right." "I should come with you," Catherine started to say, but Kade shook his head. "You are exhausted and these people might still need you. I will bring Sarah here. She can help with the cleanup. God knows there is enough of it." Kade rode out at a gallop, and Catherine turned back to the devastation. The heart of Watsonville's business district was gone, burned to ashes. People stood in small groups, looking shell-shocked, trying to come to terms with what had happened. The mayor, a portly man named Jenkins, called a town meeting in the church, the only building large enough to hold everyone. People crowded in, dirty and exhausted, and Catherine stood at the back, swaying slightly on her feet. "We have suffered a great loss," Mayor Jenkins said. "But we are not defeated. This town has weathered difficulties before, and we will weather this. We will rebuild together as a community." There was a murmur of agreement, but Catherine could also hear the doubt in people's voices. Rebuilding would take money and materials that many did not have. Several of the shop owners had lost everything, including Catherine's friend Mary, who had run the general store with her husband. "I will donate all the fabric in my shop," Catherine heard herself saying, her voice cutting through the murmurs, "for anyone who needs clothes to replace what was lost. And I will sew free of charge until everyone has what they need." There was a moment of stunned silence, then a wave of gratitude. Other people began calling out their own offers of help, resources they could share, skills they could contribute. The spirit of community that had seemed so broken moments before began to reassert itself. Kade returned with Sarah mid-morning, and the little girl's eyes went wide at the sight of the destruction. But she did not cry or complain. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and asked what she could do to help. For the next several days, the 3 of them worked alongside the rest of the town, clearing debris, salvaging what could be saved, and beginning the long process of rebuilding. It was exhausting work, but Catherine found something powerful in it. The town that had always felt like just a place to survive now felt like home. These people, with all their flaws and quirks, were her community. And Kade and Sarah, working beside her day after day, felt like her family. One evening, nearly a week after the fire, Catherine sat on the steps of her shop watching the sun set. She was alone for the first time in days, Sarah having gone home with one of the neighbor women who had offered to feed her dinner, Kade helping with the final cleanup at what used to be the saloon. She heard footsteps behind her and looked up to find Kade approaching. He looked as exhausted as she felt, his clothes still stained with soot no matter how many times he washed them. "May I sit?" he asked, and she nodded. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors paint the sky. Then Kade said, "I have been thinking." "That sounds dangerous," Catherine said, managing a tired smile. "Catherine, these past few days have shown me something important. Life is fragile and unpredictable. In moments, everything can change, and I do not want to waste the time we have being cautious or conventional." Catherine's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" Kade turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I am saying that I want you to be my wife. I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait longer, but I do not want to wait. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to make Sarah's dreams of us being a real family come true. I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that love does not have to hurt, that it can be steady and solid and true." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of joy, not pain. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I do not want to wait either. I want everything you are offering. I want to be your wife and Sarah's sister. I want a life with both of you, whatever that looks like." Kade pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, and Catherine felt like she was finally, truly home. This man, this quiet, strong, devoted man, had done what she thought impossible. He had shown her that love had not given up on her, that she could still have everything she thought she had lost. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in the same church where the town meeting had been held. Sarah stood beside Catherine as a bridesmaid, glowing with happiness in a new dress Catherine had made specially for the occasion. The whole town turned out, grateful to Catherine for her generosity after the fire, and curious about the unusual match between the widow and the mountain man. Catherine wore a cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar that Kade had specifically requested. As she walked down the aisle toward where Kade stood waiting, tall and strong and handsome in his best clothes, his long hair neatly tied back, his beard trimmed, Catherine felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful, it almost overwhelmed her. This was nothing like her wedding to William, which had been a rushed, furtive affair with only a few witnesses. This was joyful and open, a celebration not just of their love but of the community that surrounded them. When the preacher asked if she took Kade to be her lawfully wedded husband, Catherine said, "I do," in a clear, strong voice that carried no doubt. And when Kade said the same, looking into her eyes with such love and devotion that she could barely breathe, Catherine knew that she had been given a second chance at happiness. The reception was held at the town square, with everyone contributing what they could for a celebration feast. There was music and dancing, and Catherine found herself swept into Kade's arms for a waltz, surprised at how gracefully he moved for such a large man. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, smiling up at him. "My mother taught me," he said. She said that every man should know how to dance with his wife, no matter what his station in life. She was a wise woman. "She was," Kade agreed, "and I think she would have loved you." As the sun set and the party continued around them, Kade leaned down and whispered in Catherine's ear, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Garrett?" Catherine smiled at the sound of her new name. She had kept her shop in town, but she and Kade had agreed that their primary home would be the mountain cabin, at least for now. They would split their time between the town and the mountains, giving Sarah the education and social interaction she needed while maintaining the quiet, peaceful life Kade had built. "I am ready," Catherine said. "Let us go home." They said their goodbyes and collected Sarah, who was practically vibrating with excitement. The ride up to the cabin in the moonlight felt like a dream, and when they finally arrived, Kade lifted Catherine off her horse and carried her over the threshold while Sarah giggled and clapped. That night, After Sarah had gone to bed in the loft, Kade led Catherine to what was now their shared room. He had added onto the cabin specially, creating a proper bedroom with a real bed and even a dresser with a mirror. It was not fancy by city standards, but to Catherine it was perfect. Kade was gentle with her, patient and loving, showing her with his body what he had already shown her with his words and actions. This was what love was supposed to be like, Catherine realized. Not the wild, destructive passion she had experienced with William, but something deeper and more lasting. This was partnership and trust and genuine caring. Afterward, lying in Kade's arms with her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Catherine felt a peace she had never known before. She had been so certain that love had abandoned her, that she would spend the rest of her life alone and empty. But Kade had proven her wrong. He had shown her that love had not given up on her at all. It had simply been waiting for the right person, the right time, the right circumstances. "What are you thinking?" Kade asked, his hand stroking gently through her hair. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman in the world," Catherine said honestly. "I am thinking that I never believed I could feel this happy, this safe, this loved." "You deserve all of it and more," Kade said. "And I intend to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know it." The years that followed were not without challenges, but they were good years, filled with love and laughter and the steady building of a life together. Catherine kept her dress shop in Watsonville, but she also taught Sarah to sew, passing on her skills to the next generation. Sarah blossomed under their joint care, growing from a quiet, wary child into a confident, capable young woman. When Sarah was 10, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news was both joyful and terrifying. She was 30 years old, no longer young for a first-time mother, and she had never even imagined having children with William. But with Kade, it felt right, like the natural next step in their journey together. Their son was born in the mountain cabin on a snowy January morning in 1876, delivered by the town doctor with Kade and Sarah anxiously waiting outside. Catherine named him Kieran after Kade's father, and when Kade held his son for the first time, Catherine saw tears streaming down his bearded face. "Thank you," he whispered to her. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving us a family." "We already were a family," Catherine said. "Now we are just a bigger one." Sarah was besotted with her nephew, helping care for him and entertaining him for hours. She was 15 now, growing into a beautiful young woman, and Catherine was proud of everything she had become. Sarah still loved art, and Catherine had encouraged her to pursue it, buying her proper paints and canvas. Several of Sarah's paintings hung in the cabin, and she had even sold a few in town. 2 years later, Catherine gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Catherine after Catherine herself, though they called her Kade from the start. Kade was a spirited child, wild and fearless like her father, always wanting to be outside exploring. Kieran was quieter, more thoughtful, content to sit and read the books Catherine taught him from. Life in the mountains suited them all. Kade still trapped and hunted, providing for his family with the skills he had honed over years of solitary living. But he was no longer alone. His cabin was filled with noise and life, with love and laughter, with all the things he had never dared hope for when he first took in his orphaned sister. Catherine divided her time between the mountain and the town, bringing the children with her when she went to work in her shop. The town had fully rebuilt after the fire, stronger than before, and Catherine's shop had become one of the most successful businesses in Watsonville. She had even hired an assistant, a young woman named Emma, to help with the increased workload. Sarah, now 17, had begun helping in the shop as well when she was not working on her art. Several young men in town had started showing interest in her, much to Cade's consternation. Catherine found his overprotective attitude amusing, though she understood it. Sarah was the girl he had raised from childhood, had protected and cared for through some of the hardest years of both their lives. It was in the spring of 1879, when Sarah was 18, that she came to Kade and Catherine with news. She had been seeing a young man from town, the son of the baker, and he had proposed. Sarah was glowing with happiness but also nervous about how Kade would react. Kade, to his credit, handled it well. He sat down with the young man, whose name was Thomas, and had a long, serious conversation that Catherine was not privy to. Whatever was said, Thomas emerged looking slightly pale but determined, and Kade gave his blessing. Sarah's wedding was a grand affair, much bigger than Kade and Catherine's had been. The whole town celebrated, and Catherine watched her stepdaughter marry the man she loved with tears of joy streaming down her face. Sarah was no longer the scared little girl who had needed them so desperately. She was a confident, talented young woman, ready to start her own life. After Sarah moved to town with Thomas, the mountain cabin felt quieter but no less full of love. Kieran was 5 now, Katie 3, and they kept Catherine and Kade busy with their energy and curiosity. Kade proved to be as devoted a father as he had been a brother, patient and loving while also providing the structure and discipline children needed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Catherine woke to find Kade already awake, watching her in the early morning light. "Good morning," she said, smiling sleepily. "Good morning, wife," he said, a term of endearment he had used since their wedding day. 10 years. Can you believe it? "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime," Catherine said, "and sometimes it feels like yesterday. Any regrets?" Kade asked, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. "Not a single one," Catherine said honestly. "You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever. You showed me that love can be strong and steady and true, that it can heal instead of hurt. You did the same for me," Kade said. "Before you, I never thought about having a wife, about having children of my own. I was content with caring for Sarah and living my simple life. But you made me want more. You made me believe I could have more." He pulled her close, and they lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the mountain waking around them. In the loft above, they could hear the children starting to stir, and they knew their peaceful moment would soon end. "We should get up," Catherine said reluctantly. "In a minute," Kade said. "I want to hold my wife a little longer first." Catherine smiled and settled deeper into his embrace. This was everything she had never known she wanted, everything she had given up on ever having. A loving husband, beautiful children, a home filled with warmth and laughter instead of pain and uncertainty. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Kieran grew into a thoughtful young man who loved books and learning, eventually deciding to become a teacher. Katie was wild and free, more interested in exploring the mountains with her father than in any traditional feminine pursuits, though Catherine made sure she learned the basics of running a household. In 1885, Catherine gave birth to one more child, a surprise addition to their family. Another son, whom they named Samuel after Catherine's father, though they called him Sam. Sam was the perfect blend of his siblings, thoughtful like Kieran but adventurous like Katie. Sarah and Thomas had children of their own, 3 daughters who adored their Uncle Kade and Aunt Catherine. The family gatherings were loud and chaotic and absolutely wonderful, everything Catherine had ever dreamed of during her lonely years with William. As Catherine grew older, she found herself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought her to this place. She thought about the young woman she had been, so heartbroken and certain that love had betrayed her for the last time. She thought about the day Kade had walked into her shop, impossibly large and rough-looking, asking for dresses for his sister. She had been so wary of him then, so determined not to let anyone close, and yet he had broken through every defense, had shown her with patience and devotion that not all men were like William, that love did not have to be destructive. He had given her a family, a home, a life richer than anything she had imagined possible. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the mountain cabin for a celebration. Sarah and Thomas came with their daughters. Kieran, now a successful teacher in Sacramento, brought his new wife. Kade, still unmarried at 22 and showing no signs of settling down, came alone but brought a deer she had hunted herself for the feast. Sam, at 13, helped Kade with all the preparations. As Catherine looked around at all these people she loved, this family that had grown from the ashes of her broken heart, she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She caught Kade's eye across the room, and he smiled at her, that same smile that had slowly won her over so many years ago. Later, after everyone had eaten and the children were playing outside, Kade pulled Catherine aside. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. Catherine watched as he pulled out a small wooden box beautifully carved with intricate designs. "Did you make this?" she asked, amazed. Kade had never shown much interest in detailed craft work. "I have been working on it for a year," he admitted. "I wanted it to be perfect." Catherine opened the box to find a delicate necklace inside, a simple gold chain with a small pendant. The pendant was engraved with the date of their wedding and both their initials intertwined. "Kade, it is beautiful," she breathed. "Not nearly as beautiful as you," he said, taking the necklace and fastening it around her neck. 25 years, Catherine. You have given me the best 25 years of my life. You took a rough mountain man and showed him what it meant to truly love and be loved. You gave me children and a real home. You gave me everything. We gave each other everything, Catherine corrected gently. I was so broken when you found me, Kade. I thought love was just pain wearing a pretty mask, but you proved me wrong. You showed me that love can be strong and steady, that it can heal and build instead of destroy. I told you that first day I loved you, Kade said, pulling her close. I told you I would spend my life proving that love had not given up on you. Have I succeeded? Catherine laughed through tears of joy. Yes, you stubborn man. You have succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. They stood together, wrapped in each other's arms, while around them their family celebrated and laughed. This was what love looked like, Catherine thought. Not the desperate, consuming fire of her youth, but something deeper and more lasting. A steady flame that warmed without burning, that illuminated without blinding. Kade and Catherine lived to see their grandchildren grow, to celebrate 50 years of marriage, to grow old together in the mountains they both loved. They faced hardships and joys, sorrows and celebrations, but they faced them together, always together. When Kade died at 78, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, Catherine held his hand and whispered her thanks for every moment they had shared. He had given her a second chance at love, at life, at happiness. He had proven that love had not given up on her when she had given up on herself. Catherine lived for 5 more years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, still occasionally doing sewing for those who asked. She remained in the mountain cabin that had become such a symbol of the life she and Kade had built together. And when she died peacefully in her sleep at 83, she died knowing she had been truly, deeply loved. Sarah found her there in the morning, lying in the bed she had shared with Kade for so many years, a peaceful smile on her face and the gold necklace still around her neck. On the nightstand beside her was a letter, written in Catherine's careful hand. The letter told the story of a woman who had given up on love, and of the mountain man who had proven to her that love had not given up. It told of patience and devotion, of second chances and unexpected blessings. It told of a life well lived, of a love that lasted beyond reason and endured beyond death. At the end, Catherine had written, "I thought my life was over when William died, but it was only just beginning. Kade showed me that the heart is far more resilient than we believe, that it can heal from even the deepest wounds." To anyone reading this who has loved and lost, who has given up hope of ever loving again, do not give up. Love has not given up on you. It is waiting, patient and faithful for the moment when you are ready to try again. And when you find it, when you find that person who makes you believe in second chances, hold on tight. Build a life together. Create a family. Make every moment count. That is the greatest gift we can give ourselves, and the greatest legacy we can leave behind. The letter was read at her funeral, standing room only in the same church where she and Kade had married 56 years before. There was not a dry eye in the building as her children read her words, as they told the story of their parents' love. Kieran kept the letter, framing it and hanging it in his home, where his own children and grandchildren would read it and learn about the great-grandmother who had believed love was lost, and the great-grandfather who had proven her wonderfully, beautifully wrong. The mountain cabin remained in the family for generations, a symbol of the enduring power of love, of the strength that comes from never giving up on the possibility of happiness. And in Watsonville, now a thriving town far different from the dusty collection of buildings it had been in 1873, Catherine's dress shop still stood, run by her great-great-granddaughter, who had inherited both her talent with needle and thread and her belief in the transformative power of love. Because in the end, that was the truth Catherine and Kade had proven together. Love does not give up on us, even when we give up on it. It waits, patient and faithful, for the moment when we are ready to believe again. And when we find it, when we have the courage to reach out and take hold of it despite our fears and our past hurts, it can transform our lives in ways we never imagined possible. That was the legacy Kade Garrett left behind, not just to her children and grandchildren, but to everyone who ever heard her story. A woman who had given up on love found a mountain man who proved to her that love had not given up. And together, they built something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the power of a love that endures.